Well, okay, since we were off last week for spring break, I really hope that you went back and reread the chapter just to kind of refresh your memory of what's going on, to pick up the flow of the action. You know, when you watch a TV program that's a two-part, most everything we watch anymore are the reruns that are back to back to back. So you have part one, you know, at one moment, and then the very next program comes on, it's the second part of it. But not like the old days, you know, where we had to wait a whole week for the program to come on again. Or if it was the end of the season, you had to wait until the next season to find out who shot JR, you know. So I don't know why, but that particular one sticks in our mind more than any of them. But I hope you read back over that to remind you of what was going on. When we left our last lesson, Rebekah has just been given some very valuable gifts for her kindness to this stranger that she doesn't have any idea who he is. She's given him water, and she watered his camels. And then the stranger asked her two questions, verses 23 through 25. First of all, he said to her, "Whose daughter are you?" And before she has time to answer, he says, "Please tell me, is there room for us," and that's the first inkling we get that he's not by himself, "for us to lodge in your father's house?" So then she answers, but notice this is really interesting. I really didn't pick up on this until today again as I was studying it. She said in verse 25, she said to him, "We have plenty of both." Well, first of all, for 24, she tells him who she is. She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Malchi, whom she bore to Nahor." And then she answered the second question. "We have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in." But notice this, she did not invite him to come and stay. Did you pick up on that? Just because you got plenty of food and water and room doesn't mean you can come and stay with us. She didn't invite him to come and stay. You know, it doesn't mean that you're offering it. But she said, we do have plenty of room. We do have plenty of feed. And then verse 26, he bowed low and worshiped and he prayed, and then she ran off. So this man that we know he's Abraham's servant. It says in verse 26 that he bowed low. Now we're going to pick back up on this, so watch for that as we go through. He bowed low and worshiped the Lord. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master." And now he prays for himself and thanks God for himself. And he says, "As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers." And then verse 28, she ran off. The girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. She told all the people in her mother's household, whoever was there, family members, servants, her nurse, who we'll meet later. She told everybody what had happened. I mean, she was excited. But now, have you ever been so excited about something that you couldn't wait to share it? You're like, who can I tell? Who can I tell this to? It's like, start thinking about that. Sometimes I get that way when I learn something new in Scripture, like, the middle of the night. Who can I call? Who can I text at this time of night or what? Yesterday, I learned something yesterday, and I'm not going to share what it is just yet. But I learned something brand new yesterday that I was listening to this video as I was driving, just blew me away. I had never heard it before, so that's why I'm not sharing it. I'm going to wait until I can verify this. But if that's true, it's just like, wow. But so we pick up with chapter 24, we pick up the account, or we might say the rest of the story. And we need to look at it and think about what's happening here. And as I've studied this week, the thing last week, and in dividing this into two lessons, and I said last time, I said that basically this second part just repeats everything that we had in the first part. So why? Why tell it all again? Why couldn't it have just said, and he went and told them everything that had happened? But no, it repeats everything. And so I knew there had to be a reason that it was written down again. I just didn't really know what that was. But actually, as I've been studying this, I now begin to see why it's important that we have it again. But what I really found that just as intrigued me is that there's basically 2 or 3 different ways to interpret this event. And how we interpret it will determine how we understand what's happening. And the thing is, I don't really know which one's right. I mean, I've gone through everything I know how to go through. I've looked at verbs, I've looked at tenses, I've looked at words, I've looked at everything I need, everything I know to do. And I don't know which way is the right way. I know which one I believe is the right way based on Scripture as I read it. But what I found that really surprised me is very good and very trustworthy commentaries disagree. You know, I always go back to Matthew Henry's quote when he's talking about Paul and Barnabas disagreeing and, going their different ways. And what he said was, the best of men are just men. And as I read these commentaries, well, the first 2 that I read took it a different direction than what I believe happened. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And then as I went to the next, and then it's like, okay, this is a totally different view on it. So I'm going to throw this out and we'll see what we think here. But it all seems to hinge on this one thing. Do you think Rebekah heard the servant's prayer in verse 27 before she ran back? Or was he praying while she ran back? Was he praying audibly, or was he praying in his own heart? So let me throw this out first. Several commentaries say that she heard the servant praise the God of Abraham, and therefore she knew that this servant, who he was and where he was from. And that's what she told the family when she went back. And that's why Laban ran so quickly out to meet him. Okay. Other commentaries, equally valid, equally trustworthy, say no, Laban was motivated by the gifts that Rebekah had received, even if he knew the servant was from Abraham. Still, it was not that's what motivated him. It was the gold. So what do you think? Was Laban motivated by family or money, or was he just a very gracious and generous host, as one commentary described him? I mean, after all, isn't that exactly what Abraham did when the visitors came there in chapter 18? He ran to meet them and invited them in and washed their feet and provided food. So which do you think it is? What motivated Laban?
I think it was greed. Yeah. The reason I say that is because of what happens in 29.
Exactly. And we think, I got this later on, but we say all the time, don't try to read this like you don't know what's going to happen next, but we already know what's going to happen then. But what do you think? Do you think that she heard, first of all, do you think she heard the servant praying or not? Did she know? Forget Laban for a moment. Did she know that he was from Abraham, or does she still not know?
Well, the way that it reads, she said, "We have straw and fodder," and then he bowed down, and then she ran and told to her mother's household.
Yeah.
So, that.
If you read it in that sequence, he is praying, and that caused her to run off, or to run back to the household. My thought on that has always been that basically verse 28 is that when she said that to him, then she ran back to the family that she didn't hear him. I don't think she heard him. I mean, that's my opinion. But we don't know. I tried to see, is there any word, is there any indication that this was said audibly, or was it said, now later on he himself will say that first prayer back up in verses 13 and 14, he himself will say that he spoke that in his heart. So we know he didn't say that out loud. But nothing is said about this worship.
He's, in verse 15, it says, before he had finished speaking.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but it will say later that he was saying it in his heart.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I believe you.
You know, I'm just saying, if he was saying it out loud, you know, the servants that was with him would hear. But and I looked at, he does say he was speaking that in his heart, but it doesn't say that about this prayer.
I thought that an angel went to that family before the servant ever got there,
Well, that's an interesting thought.
and that they were expecting him. And when she walked in with the jewels, Laban immediately knew he's here, and that's why he jumped and ran.
Good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Now he does. He is told. Abraham tells him that God will send His angel before you.
Yes. And
Nothing is said about anyone going to the house and telling them that, but that's an interesting thought.
I just thought that they were expecting him, and as soon as she walked in, Laban knew that he was there.
Good point. Hadn't thought about that way. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, when I read in here, when he took out the nose ring and the bracelets, my Bible doesn't say he gave them to her. It just says he took them out. He does. It doesn't.
Well, my verse 22 it says that he took them out. And it says for her wrists. Laying.
Mine doesn't say that, and that had me confused because I thought, well, how did she get them if he didn't give them?
Yeah. What translation is that?
This is the New International Version.
NIV. Okay.
And it never says that he gave them to her, but then later when you read when she went to her family, she has them.
So he had to have given them to her, right? Right. That is a little confusing there. Yeah. Well,
Some things are implied.
Yeah.
Well, even in my Bible, and the same as yours, it says, the bracelets for her wrist.
Yeah.
It
doesn't say he puts them on her. Yeah, that's exactly right. It doesn't say that he puts them on her. But, like I said, later on, we know she has them, so obviously he did. Well, many times, and I'll tell you as we go along what I think about Laban, but many times, and especially in Genesis, we see either an overview statement or an overview chapter, and then the very next statement or the very next chapter then goes back and gives details on that. And that's exactly what's happening here in verses 29 and 30. Verse 29, now, verse 28, she ran to the household, and then we get this bit of information. Now, Rebekah had a brother. Now, this is our first introduction to Laban. He wasn't even mentioned in that list of genealogy that we were given back in chapter 22 when Abraham was told about the family. He's not mentioned at all. But we are told that Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran, notice the verbs in this, he ran outside to the man at the spring. So first of all, like I said, we're introduced to Laban, who after Rebekah came back, ran out to meet the man at the spring. I thought that was an interesting way of putting that. If they had known who he was, wouldn't it have said, ran out to meet Abraham's servant? But he ran out to meet the man at the spring.
But he says, come you who are blessed by the Lord.
He does say that, yes.
So that's why I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. This is just the way that I read it and what it appears to me, and that may not be right. But the question came up in many of the commentaries as to why Laban went rather than Bethuel, her father. Actually, Josephus said that this Bethuel is not her father, it's her brother, who also had the same name as the father. But the father was dead. Other commentaries say maybe the father was old and infirm or an invalid or something. It's why Laban ran out there. Some speculate that he was just old or an invalid, or maybe Laban just jumped up and took off before anybody else could do anything, which is what I have viewed. Now, again, Kay, like knowing what we know about Laban in the future, that's where our minds automatically go like that. in my view, by calling the man at the spring, first of all, I believe that Laban didn't know who he was. So maybe he was just being gracious and a generous host. But then, like Sherry said, we read in verse 30. Well, before that, in verse 30, we get a picture of him, I think. This is why, not even talking about what he'll do in chapters 29 and 30 later on, but looking at this point in time, verse 30. And it came about when he, Laban, saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went out to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels, plural, not just a camel, but many camels, 10. We know there are 10 camels. So he sees the man and the servants, however many they are, and he has these camels, and these camels all have packs on them. But notice what the servant is doing. He's still waiting by the spring. He didn't follow her to the house. He didn't do anything else. He's waiting to see what's God going to do next. You know, because he's excited. So he's waiting by the spring. Now, like I said earlier, I know that we say all the time to try to read the story, making yourself not know what's going to happen next. And maybe I'm a little prejudiced against Laban because I do know what's going to happen later on in chapters 29 through 31. But personally, I think verse 30 gives us a pretty good insight to what motivates him. When he saw the gold, when he saw the ring and the bracelets, then he ran out. Ward Wiersbe put it this way. He said, Laban was more excited about the expensive gifts than the privilege of showing hospitality to the stranger. And that struck me, the way he worded that. I thought, the privilege of showing hospitality to a stranger. Do you ever think about that? Have you ever considered it a privilege to say, hold the door open for somebody coming behind you, or open the door for somebody, or offering to take a grocery buggy back? Do you ever think about it being a privilege?
Well, that was a big deal back then, the hospitality that they showed.
Oh, it was. But I mean, today, think about, do you do that just being kind and gracious to people, or have you ever really thought about what a privilege it is to do that?
I do, especially like if I have a family dinner.
Yeah.
That they can come and be at my table.
Yeah, it's a privilege. It actually, you know, like I said, we do this. I think we do this a lot of times, but I don't think I've ever thought of it as being a privilege to get to serve other people that way. It's just something that you do.
You know, sometimes when you do something for someone and they thank you and you say, "It's my pleasure."
Yeah.
And sometimes it really is your pleasure.
Yeah. Sometimes it really is. So it is a privilege to be able to serve others.
Yeah, Easterners are still that way.
Yeah, they're very, very gracious people.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very
You gotta be
hospitable.
careful how you compliment them, or else you'll end up with whatever you compliment them. Because they'll give it to you right there.
And then you hurt their feelings if you give it back.
Yeah.
I think that movie, Jeremiah Johnson, where he's just being so nice to this chief, you know, and he gives him his daughter. Says, "I don't want her." You can't tell him you don't want her. Got to be careful there.
Especially with food.
Oh,
You
yes.
got to be real careful because they'll give you food that.
And then you got to eat it. So there you go.
No, you don't. Not if you got a napkin,
Yeah, there you go.
which I've got done. What is this, right? That's exactly, I was like, I was in
Don't-
my
don't-
mouth and I was like,
Don't tell me what this is. So, all right, but
going down.
now look at what Laban says to the stranger. Laban says to him, as Sherry said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord." So maybe he did know. Maybe he did hear the servant. Maybe she did hear the servant praying, or maybe she saw the servant bowing down in a prayerful stance as she was leaving, and she related that to the family. We don't really know. One writer who obviously did not like Laban at all, even a little bit, said, "How easily religious language is picked up by those who really have no claim to use it." I thought that was funny. Some people talk a good game. You know, they have an entirely different language when they're around one group of people than when they're with another group of people. We have to be very careful about that. They talk a good game. But back to Laban, and honestly, I don't care much for him either. But I won't say that he's a liar, but I will say that he likes to exaggerate. So look at the rest of the verse. He says, "Why do you stand outside since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" He prepared nothing. He ain't done anything. All he did was see the gold on her wrist and take off out to get this guy. He hadn't had time to prepare anything.
See, once again, I thought they were waiting for
There you go. If they were waiting for them, then he would have already prepared.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. And what really threw me, I have looked at everything I know to look at. And you can honestly interpret this in different ways.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I like your theory that the angel came from.
It's a better thought than what I think really happened. But
I'm not reading this like, there's any
Deeper, ulterior
I'm
motive,
just reading it for what it is.
yeah,
And that's what we're supposed to do, aren't we?
yeah.
Read scripture for what it
Exactly.
actually said.
And I think verse 30 tells us exactly what it is, but that's my opinion about him. So, and again, we if you know what the rest of the story, you know how he will be. But even without that, as I read verse 30, that's what I see. But honestly, again, we can interpret this in different ways. So then, verse 32. So the man, the way I read it, they still don't know who he is. They may or they may not. But he entered the house, and then Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels, and water to wash his feet, that would be the servant, and the feet of the men who were with him. And just the way I've been reading it, I'd see Laban as wondering what's in all those bundles. If she's got this, how much more is hid away in those bundles? But Laban did all the things that were expected and all the things that were customary. And this is the first time that we hear that there are other men with the servant. We don't know that up until here. We don't know how many. We know there's at least two, because it's plural, it's men, but we don't know how many. So then verse 33, the meal is brought out. And the custom was that you eat the meal first and then you discuss the business. We saw that in chapter 18 when God and the two angels came and Abraham, and they had the meal, and then afterward the business was discussed. But the servant has a one-track mind. And he says in verse 33, but when the food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." And he, that would be Laban, said, "Speak on." So perhaps he was excited to cut to the chase. Perhaps he wanted to know what other treasures the man had, or perhaps he wanted to know more detail. But about the servant, one teacher said the servant knew his mission. He did not want to wait until the meal was over. He like I said, he had a one-track mind, and he wasn't sidetracked by other things. He knew what he was there for, and that was to find a wife for Isaac. And it's a good thing if you know what your mission is. If we don't know what our mission is, if we don't know what our calling is, we can end up having our fingers in so many pies that we don't do any of them well. And it's easy to get caught up in a situation like that. There's an abundance of good things that we can do, but you can't do everything. Perhaps they're not our good things. They're still good things, but we can't do everything. So then in verses 34 through 48, the servant recounts the story. And one commentary said, as we overhear the servant recount more details, we see the miracle of God's provision was even more grand than we saw at the first. When we read this last time, and we studied it in the first part of this chapter, we saw these things unfolding as they were happening. Now, when we hear it given again, we can see more in it. And sometimes something may happen in our lives, and then we think about it later, or we're telling the story to somebody else later, and we see more in it than we saw when it was actually happening. We begin to see, what they say, hindsight's 20/20. By hindsight, you can see how God's hand directed you, or how God did this in your life. Whereas it's taking place in real time, you may not see that. It's happening too quickly. And so, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to read over this like we did that real estate transaction for Sarah's burial plot, and discuss it a little as we go along. But put yourself in the family's place, excluding the thought that they already knew. If the angel had told them, or they already knew this, that's one thing. But if they didn't know, and this is all happening brand new for them, put yourself in the family's place. And also, think about Rebekah. Now, this has happened to Rebekah. Put yourself in her place, hearing these things said about the actions that she took, and she didn't even know the ramifications of what she was doing.
So how old do you think Rebekah is?
That's a really good question. I don't know, but guesstimating, I'm thinking somewhere maybe 20s, thereabouts. Because, and somebody in the morning group, and I meant to make a note of this, and I forgot it till you said that. Somebody in the morning group last time said, how old were men generally when they got married? And so I said, well, I really don't know, but actually we have it. If you turn back to chapter 11, now of course if you go all the way back to chapter 5, they're 100 years old and they live to be 900 years old. But in chapter 11, what we see, beginning with verse 11, Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, he lived 500 years after. I'll come back up, verse 10. Shem was 100 years old when his son Arpachshad, however you now pronounce that, was born. But after that one, after Arpachshad, most of them down through there are in their 30s or 40s. Arpachshad was 35 years old when his son was born. Shelah was 30 years old. Eber was 34. Peleg was 30. Reu was 32, and so forth, all the way to Nahor was 29. This is Terah's father, who he also had a son named Nahor. But he was 29 when Terah was born. But then Terah was 70 years when Abraham, Nahor, and Haran were born. So they were all in their late 20s or 30s during that time frame when the sons were born. The women were not given their ages, except Sarah, of course, who was 90. But that was the unusual one. So I'm guessing somewhere 20s. I don't think she would be much more than 30, but probably around that age, because they did marry very young and had children very young.
If I've always heard correctly, sometimes they would trot the girls when they're born.
Really?
Yeah. And they can be engaged by the time they're 12.
Yeah.
So
it could be very young, but when
I can't believe that Rebekah would be.
Especially when you think about what she just did, of carrying that water. She had to have some strength on her and be old enough, strong enough to do that sort of thing, and old enough to be sent by herself to do that. So we don't know, but we can guesstimate on that. But think about her as she's sitting there hearing this story being recounted about her. So beginning in verse 34. And so the man said, I'm Abraham's servant. Now, we don't know if they know that already or not, but if they didn't, they know it now. So, however you interpret this story, again, we say either one of these three ways are equally valid. I know which way that I think it is, but you may have a different view on that. But whichever way you think it is, view that account from your viewpoint there. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. And he said, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master so that he has become rich. And look at what he says that his master has. He mentions 8 things. And in my translation, this is the way they're listed. God has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys. Now, our English teachers would tell us to remove all those ands and put a comma between all of those. But when you see something in Scripture that's written this way, and it's a list of things or even a list of names, and the word and is between every one of them, that tells us that every one of these was just as important as the other one. If you get a list where there's commas in between, the first one mentioned is the person is usually the oldest or the most important of that group. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I don't think Shem was the oldest, but he was the most important in that group. So in this case, all of these things, these 8 things are extremely important, extremely valuable, and neither one of them is more important or valuable than the other. And then he goes on to say, now Sarah, and they would have remembered Sarah. You can think about them sitting around, especially the older ones. Oh yeah, I remember Sarah. Yeah, she was. I remember she was married to Abraham. Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age. Yeah, I remember that about her. I remember she was barren. She had no children when she left here. And then he goes on to say, and he, his master, Abraham, has given him, the son, all that he has. He's already given him his inheritance. We're not given Isaac's name at this point, but he has given it. Now we'll see next time in chapter 25, when Abraham marries again and has these other sons, we'll see that he gave things to them, and he gave things to Ishmael. We already know that, but we will see next time in verse 5 that says, now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, meaning the inheritance, the covenant, the inheritance went to this son that we don't know his name yet here in verse 36. And then he goes on to say, and my master made me swear. Now they may or may not have known how this oath would have been taken, but made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land that I live. That may have gone through their mind. Well, why didn't he just marry somebody down there? There's plenty of women down there. Well, no, because Abraham made him swear. And then verse 38, but Abraham, the servant continues to tell the story about what Abraham told him. But you shall go to my father's house, to Terah's house, meaning Terah's Toledot, his lineage, and to my relatives. Now this is going to play an important part. It doesn't say go to Bethuel's family. It says go to my relatives and take a wife for my son. Last time when God answered his prayer in exactly the same way that he answered it, and we saw verse 21 said, meanwhile the man, the servant, was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. And we jokingly said, well, how much more does he want? I mean, he's ticked off all the boxes, how much more? Well, this is why. Would she be the one out of all the relatives to take a wife for my son? And I said to my master, well, suppose the woman does not follow me. And he, my master, said to me, and this is a statement of Abraham's faith, the Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you to make your journey successful. And you will take a wife for my son from my relatives and from my father's house. Again, it's very important. He's not saying this house, from my father's house. But then he goes on, as we know that the servant was worried at this point whenever he made the oath. And so Abraham tells him, then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives if they do not give her to you. You'll be free from my oath. So then he goes on, and I would love to have seen Rebekah's face when all this was being transpired. Verse 42, so the servant continues. So I came today. Remember, this is still the same day. I came today, this evening. We know it was late in the evening. We don't know how late it is by now. So I came today to the spring, and I said, oh, was this prayer. O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now thou wilt make my journey on which I go successful. Behold, I am standing by the spring. Here I am. And may it be that the maiden, and remember we talked about this last time, the maiden who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, please let me drink a little water. I'm just going to ask her for just a sup, just a little bit of water from your jar. But she instead will say, drink all you want. Remember, there's two different words for drink there. The first one is drink a little bit. The second word for drink means drink all you want. And then have her add to that, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. And then he said, before I finish speaking in my heart. So this tells us he was not praying this part, at least, out loud. I was speaking in my heart. So think about, what do you think about Rebekah sitting there hearing that? I did. I said that to him. I didn't think it was such a big deal. I've always been taught to give as much as you want.
I don't know if she was there.
Do what?
I don't know if she was there.
You don't think she was here during this?
No, because normally only men are talking and the women are elsewhere or behind curtains or whatever. Now, she may have heard it. Yeah. But she wasn't there in the room.
Well,
I don't think.
that could be true. I was looking ahead because he will say over in verse 51, just jumping ahead real quickly, he will say, Rebekah is before you take her. She's at least close.
Yep.
But whether she's in the room or not, I believe she's hearing this. So let's imagine what's going through her mind. Mm-hmm. And we have to wonder, had she been praying for the spouse for a long time? I mentioned last time, did you pray for your husband or your spouse before you married them? And somebody in the Tuesday morning group says, no, but I've sure prayed a lot for him since then. And it ain't stopped yet. But she may have been praying for him. And to see that this is happening before her eyes, when you see a prayer answered before your face, I mean, that's the most amazing thing ever was. And it's just almost beyond imagination. But anyway, so he did all this, and then verse 47, so then I asked her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And then the servant said, I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrist. So now we know he actually, does your translation say that here?
It does say it here. Yeah.
Okay, so now it was inferred before. It had to have happened, but now he said, that's what I did. So then he summarizes his prayer. He doesn't tell everything, but he summarizes his prayer. And then, let me back up. And then he said, and then I bowed low and worshiped the Lord. So where he worships and where he prays is in verse 27. So here he doesn't tell everything that he said in that prayer. Here he summarizes it. And he said, I bowed low and worshiped the Lord and said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now, he doesn't add the part about how God has blessed him. Because, remember, it's all about the master. And in fact, a lot of the commentaries at this point went a lot into the typology of the servant being a picture of the Holy Spirit, where the Holy Spirit doesn't speak of himself, he only speaks of Jesus and of God. I think that I had that written down. I believe that's John 16, somewhere around 12, 13, thereabouts. But the Holy Spirit doesn't speak of himself. And so a lot of the commentaries begin talking about that here. But all this detail, again, in relating what has happened, shows us the importance of this mission. Every detail about this mission was important. It was important as it was happening. It was important as he was relating it to the family. Even, Sherry, even if they knew that he was coming, they still didn't know the details of the conversation and what transpired. And so they may have known someone was coming, but they don't know the details of how it's going to come about. So when he relates this, either it confirms what they believed, or it encourages them that this is Abraham's son. But now the ball's in their court. Are they going to do the right thing? So look at verse 49. So now the servant, he basically has given a marriage proposal, but he doesn't put it in so many words in black and white. But what he says is, so now, if you're going to deal kindly, or if you're going to show loving kindness and truth to my master, tell me. And if you're not, tell me that too. Let me know, that I may turn to the right or to the left. So the servant has done everything that he could do.
And I thought that was why he asked before they ever eat, let me tell you this, and then if you're not going to let her come with me, I'll go. I don't want to eat even.
Yeah, exactly.
He wasn't going to stay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He, like we said, the custom was to do all your meal and then do the business after. But you're right, he is such a one-track mind, and he is on such a mission that if this is not going to work, I'm going somewhere else. That's why he wants that done first. So he's done everything he knows to do. Now the decision would need to be made by the family. The ball's in your court. He knew and he saw the hand of the Lord was in all that had happened. But the family still had free will. And so he waited for the reply. So basically he was saying, and now you know the story. What's your answer? So I don't know what to do. Because, as we just said, you remember, we saw back in chapter 22, verses 21 and 22, Nahor had 7 other sons besides Bethuel. There had to have been some other granddaughters somewhere. Even though Rebekah had ticked off all the boxes, she had done everything that he asked, this still may not be the one. And so he asked, if Rebekah is not to be the wife, I'm sure there are other granddaughters. It's kind of like what Mordecai told Esther. Remember, he told her, he said, if you don't do this, somebody else will. God's ultimate will, God's sovereign will be done. But there is still God's permissive will that plays within that. And now, if this were a TV program, it would cut to commercial about this time. But then I imagine that Laban, the son, and Bethuel, the father, looked at one another and said, verse 50, The matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good or bad. The New Living Translation translates it this way. Then Laban and Bethuel replied, the Lord has obviously brought you here, so there's nothing we can say. And again, we can interpret this in different ways because we don't know. I mean, the tenses of the verbs don't even give us any clues. We don't know the body language. We don't know the tone of voice. We don't know really how they're answering. I don't know. I actually don't know if they're actually for this marriage or if they just feel like they don't have a choice. It appears like they're saying, the Lord has brought you here. We really don't have any say in the matter.
My Bible says we cannot interfere.
We cannot interfere. That sounds like they're not really too happy about this.
But there was so much, all the gold and everything. I mean,
Yeah.
they'd be happy about it.
Well, Laban, yeah. Especially. Nothing we can do about it.
It may be just, they said, this is the Lord's will.
Exactly.
Oh, I took it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, two totally different ways of reading this same event.
I sort of see it in a positive sense. That
Yes.
Yeah. So, verse 51. They say, behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. And again, I just don't know how to read this. Take her and go, or in the attitude of with our blessing, take her and go. You think of the scene. Now, whether they're, as Kay said, whether they're all in the same room together or not, they've come out now. They're together now. So Rebekah is there. Her mother is there. Her nurse is there. The men with the servant and then their own servants are there. So what can they say?
Well, they know that, okay, Rebekah leaving, it's one less mouth to feed.
It is that.
But with Rebekah leaving, they know they're going to get dowry. And he has just told them that his master is
very rich.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say one less mouth to feed and one less hand to work.
Oh, no. In the house.
Well, carry the water. Somebody else is going to have to carry the water if she's
There's a
gone.
whole bunch of cousins.
Yeah, there you go.
Females. And
Yeah. But, so what can they say? I mean, it's obvious that the Lord has directed the servant there. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Plus, we don't know how Rebecca's reacting. Maybe Rebecca's sitting over in a chair going, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please. Or yes, yeah, I want to go. Or yeah.
She's fingering her bracelet.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is nice. I want to go. Yeah, I think I'll go with this guy. That's nice.
the Bible doesn't say.
Yeah. It just doesn't say.
Maybe if it was important for us to know, the Bible would have given us there was some kind of indication if it was important for us to know.
Yeah. And again, I think these are, but again, because of what all I've read this week, this is two credible interpretations.
Yeah.
Equally credible.
Rebekah knows, this is a relative.
Yeah.
And he comes from good stocks.
Yes.
She knows that.
Yes.
He's rich.
Yes.
And he's going to take care of me.
Yes. And if he's gone to this trouble.
Right. He's gone this length.
Yeah. 500 miles.
This is a good omen.
Yeah. That's exactly what I think about. Now, I think that my first impression on this is Laban and Bethuel are all for it because of the reward that they're going to get.
Dowry.
Yeah. But, like I said, I looked at all the verbs, I looked at all the tenses, it's just really no clue, but other than what we know in the future about Laban. But the commentaries that I read say that Laban and Bethuel are all for it. But it's just the way that it's worded there. We really can't say anything about it. The Lord has spoken. We can't say anything about it. It just makes us wonder. But I want to share this, and this, I know this is taking a tangent, the kind of a sidebar thing. But how something is said makes all the difference. Again, we don't know their body language, we don't know their tone of voice, but how something is said makes all the difference. And as I was studying this afternoon, I was reminded of a section in one of William Barclay's commentaries on Luke 22, verses 29 through 46. And it's on Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prays, "Thy will be done." And, again, this really doesn't have anything to do with this exactly, but I just really felt led to share this. Barclay said that it makes all the difference in what tone of voice a man says, "Thy will be done." It can be helpless or hopeless submission. "Oh, well, nothing I can do about it. Thy will be done." Or it can be battered submission. "I give up. Thy will be done." Or it can be angered submission. "All right then, thy will be done." Or it can be said with the accent of perfect trust, with open arms, "Thy will be done." Barclay goes on to say that is how Jesus said it. He was speaking to the one who was Father. He was speaking to a God whose everlasting arms were underneath and about him, even on the cross. He was submitting, but he was submitting to the love that would never let him go. And then he added, life's hardest task is to accept what we cannot understand. But we can do even that if we are sure enough of the love of God. And I thought, we don't have to know their attitudes. We don't have to know their tone of voice. All we need to know is that it was God's will, regardless of how they reacted. God was in control of that situation. But back to chapter 24, we don't know how Laban and Bethuel said this, but we do know how the servant took it. And he took it this way, verse 52. And it came about when Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. And notice this. It just struck me the other night as I was reading this, how this servant has grown in his worship. This is the third time of prayer or worship in this account. The first time was back in verse 12, where he simply asked God to do something, basically give me a sign. And then he had that very simple childlike prayer. We're not told he does anything other than just talk to God in his heart. Next, when God answers that prayer, we see in verses 26, and then he mentions it again in verse 48, he recounts the story. And he said, then the man bowed low. First time he's just standing talking to God. Second time he bows low and worshiped the Lord. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master and for me. Now he includes himself. For the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. And then the third time, here, he bowed himself to the ground. He didn't just bow low, he bows himself completely to the ground. And we can see how his faith has grown, how his relationship with this God of his master has now become his God. And he's grown in that. So then look at what he did, verse 53. And the servant then brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments, and he gave them all around. Gave them to Rebekah, and he gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. And now this is not, he's not buying her. This is not a bribe. This is just, it's called a bride price, but actually it's more like we would use the term dowry. They received these gifts. And then, verse 54 begins, then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. And as the scene fades out on this festive meal, the music changes. And then the next morning, the servant gets up. He's anxious to go back. I bet he hardly slept any. He got up early. He's ready to go back. Let's hit the road early. And he said, when they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. We're off. We're ready to go. I thought, boy, she had to pack quick. Had to pack up everything she was going to take overnight. So he's ready to go. And then verses 55 through 61, we'll look at this together. But her brother, Laban, and I've got to note here, Laban's always causing trouble. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few. In other words, why don't you hurry? Why don't you just stay a few days, 10 days or so. Now, some of the commentaries say that the way this is worded, it's an open-ended thing. It was a minimum of 10 days. Not just, why don't you just stay 10 more days? No, it was a minimum of 10 days. And, why don't you just stay longer? And he said to them, do not delay me. Since my master has prospered my way, since the Lord has prospered my way, send me away that I may go to my master. Now, were they having second thoughts? Why do you think they did that?
I thought it was because she was going to be gone and they'd never see her again, and they wanted enough time to tell her goodbye.
As a mother, I can see that.
Could very well have been.
Just a few more days.
Yeah, just a few more days, but don't you know it'd just been harder if it was more days?
Yeah,
Or
if you were mom, you take whatever you could get.
Yeah, exactly.
And time for the family to come and sit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Gather the rest of the family in, maybe have a feast or anything. But this servant has a one-track mind.
They wanted a wedding shower, too.
Yeah, I've got to get a shower. I've got to have a shower. Well, then the servant thinks, I got to have more camels to take all his stuff back, all his dish towels and stuff. Yeah, got to have your dish towels. So, no, he's like, no, I need to get back. And so they say, okay, we'll just ask Rebekah what she thinks about it all. So, verse 58, they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I'm all for it. I'm right there. I will go. And so they, and I got a note here that says, God had chosen Rebekah for Isaac, yet Rebekah had to make her choice of Isaac. God had chosen her, but she had to make the choice. She had to submit and to go. And we see again, we talked last time about the attributes of Rebekah, all the things we could name off about her. Here's another one. She knew her own mind. And so she was ready to go.
Well, maybe she just wanted to get out of there.
Well, that could have been, I'm tired of carrying this water. I want to go for someone to carry my water.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
my household.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably good looking, rich, good looking.
Well, she doesn't know what he looks like yet.
Yeah, she hadn't seen him.
She hadn't seen him. She doesn't know what he looks like.
She doesn't care what he looks like. He's got money.
There you go. Who cares what he looks like exactly? So thus they sent their sister, Laban's sister. Well, in fact, this is where some of the commentaries say that Bethuel is a brother too, because it's just their sister. But anyway, they sent Rebekah and her nurse. We'll find out later that the nurse's name is Deborah. She'll show up again and again. But sent Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. And that's very similar to the blessing that was given to Abraham earlier. So now they're going back. So let me find my place here. So then Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man, the servant. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. So any of the thoughts or comments on that part before we go on to this last section?
Don't you think that the family knew about Abraham's success?
I think they had to have.
I mean, word traveled.
Yeah.
So I would think,
even at that distance, he had heard about them by the caravans.
Yeah.
So likely the caravans had told them. Yeah, I think so.
So that may have been why, Laban ran out of because he knew how rich Abraham was.
Yeah. Yeah, and I still think that was his greatest motivating factor because of what we know about him. But anyway, so okay, verse 62. Now they've made the trip back the same way as they went up there. We don't know anything about what happened on the trip or what they talked about or anything. But verse 62 says, now Isaac, the scene changes back to Hebron. And it says, now Isaac had come from going to I don't know how to pronounce that, Beer-lahai-roi. Anyway, this is the place, if you remember, where the well was, where the angel of the Lord met Hagar the first time. It's a very fertile, well-watered area near where Abraham had been before when he went into Gerar. That's in the Southland, is where he was. And apparently Isaac was living down there, or still had crops or animals down there, but he had come back to Hebron. He had come from going to there, for he was living in the Negev. He was living in the south part, but he'd come back to Hebron. And verse 63, we see, now Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. So let's just hold it there for a second. This word meditate is a really interesting word. This is the only place in Scripture where this particular word is used. The word meditate is all over the Psalms, but it's an entirely different word. Many of your study Bibles, if you have notations, it will say that the meaning of the word is unclear. But some dictionaries say that the word means to muse, M-U-S-E, to muse. But I think it was a picture, when you think about, what do you think of when you hear the word muse?
Ponder.
Yeah,
Ponder. Ponder. See the cogs a turning. Wonder about it. Exactly. I think, and this is just a personal opinion, I think this is the way Isaac worshipped. This is just what he did. It was just a picture of the way that Isaac worshipped and prayed. Now, have you ever, I've done this a lot, I'm sure many of you have you ever gone walking in the woods or in the fields and just think and pray? Not just any one thing, you're just taking it all in, and you may have something specific on your mind or not, and you're just in a worshipful mode or mood. And I think that's what this word is a picture of, musing. It means to pray and worship and think and ponder and meditate. It's just talking with God. And I think this was just the method that that's his mode of worshiping. Now, we don't know if Abraham had told Isaac what he had done. We don't know if he told Isaac where the servant had gone. Most commentaries think that he did. But even if he did know where the servant had gone, he couldn't have had any idea when he would be coming back. He didn't know, under good circumstances, how long a trip like that would take. But you never know if you run into situations or whatever. You think a normal trip would take you from point A to point B. It takes me this many hours to go this many miles. But you don't know if there's been a wreck, if there's a roadblock, if something happened. You don't know. So some of the commentaries said that he was out in the field looking for them. I don't think so, because you just can't pinpoint it that well. We don't know for sure, but my opinion is, like I said, this is just the way that Isaac worshipped and prayed. And then on this particular evening, well, let me back up. As I was first reading this and studying over it, what I usually do is when I start my notes and start my study, I just read it through and just write down anything that comes to mind. I may or may not end up using it. I may, dig deeper on it, but just whatever comes to mind. And what I wrote down was Isaac went out to meditate in the field. And the first thing that came to my mind was that field that Abraham bought along with the cave. And I wondered, was he out in that field? Did he go to where his mother had been buried? And, like we would visit a gravesite or something. Is that where he was? Is that, because as we see at the end of this, and we talked about it last time, it said Isaac was comforted after his mother's death, and it came up in I think in all three groups last time about, did he mourn for his mother for 3 years? Was he in a state of mourning for 3 years? Well, whether he was or not, so I think somebody in the Tuesday morning group said they wondered if he was a mama's boy. It doesn't matter. Being born, we know that what God said to Abraham, take your son, your only son whom you love. Well, if Abraham loved him, Sarah loved him. And we know they probably had a very close relationship. So whether he is in mourning for 3 years or not, it doesn't matter. Every one of us, if we've lost our mothers, we still miss our mothers. It's been 25 years for me. So, I'm not in mourning, but I still greatly, greatly miss her. So, we don't know, but the more I've studied, I couldn't find any connection with the word field there. So that was just a fleeting thought. I don't think that's where he was. I think he was just out in the open spaces and he was praying. And then on this particular evening, I think this was something that he did regularly, but on this particular evening, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, and behold, camels were coming. And verse 64 begins, and Rebekah lifted up her eyes. And that phrase intrigued me. He lifted up his eyes. She lifted up her eyes. And I thought, now wait a minute. I've heard that phrase before. And so I went digging back through. And sure enough, it comes in twice in chapter 22. First, in verse 4, Abraham and Isaac arrive at Mount Moriah, and it says Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place where he was to go. And then, after God had stopped his hand from slaying Isaac, it says verse 13, Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, the ram caught in the thicket. None of the commentaries touched on that connection. I don't know if there's really a connection there. It just that phrase. Sometimes when you're reading over something, and a particular phrase will jump out at you, and it just caught my attention. I didn't have time to really dig into it, but that I did do a search just on that phrase, and that phrase is used some 20 times in the Bible. So that would make a good study for another time, But as I said, none of the commentaries made any particular note about it, but I was thinking about it yesterday as I was driving, and I thought, what's the connection in at least these 4 instances? What's the connection to them? And I thought, the connection is God caused each one of these things to happen. God caused them to lift up their eyes and look. But they both looked up and saw each other.
This was a Harlequin movie.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, the only thing that's missing is the violins.
Yeah, exactly.
Writing on the camera.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Hair flowing.
Oh, well, now, wait till you see this next part. It says, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Does anybody's translation have a different word there for dismounted?
Got down.
Got down.
Jumped off.
Jumped off?
You can't jump off a camel.
Well, let me tell you what the real word is. The real word is she fell off. That's what the word is. She fell off. Yeah, you talk about falling for somebody. I don't know. That wasn't in any of the translations that I looked at, but that is the definition of that word. She fell off. But at any rate, she was getting down so quickly And she pretty much fell over. So
Those camels have got to come down on the back and then they come down in the front. I mean, it's
an ordeal.
It is.
it's not, you don't just make a decision to, maybe she just jumped off.
She might have.
So.
But that's a long way down.
That's a long way down.
And then the camel gets around and spit at her.
Okay. And so, moving right along. And so she saw Isaac from the distance, and she came down, however she did it. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." And she took her veil and covered herself, because that would be the custom. That's what she would do. And then this is really verse 66. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Can you hear him relating this entire story all over again?
Why didn't he say it's my master's son? Why does he say it's my master?
Great point. I missed that.
Yeah.
But I guess the way I look at it is that because Abraham had already given Isaac.
That's what I was going to say. When you go back, let's see, where is it? Where is it that he does that?
But it's in 25, verse 5, when it says Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac.
Yeah, but it's also here.
Yeah.
When he's talking to them and he says that he's giving them all.
Yeah. Where is that?
Okay.
I can't spot it.
41 right in there.
Free from okay, I didn't go back far enough. Oh, anyway, I can't spot it. But he did.
36.
36. Okay, there you go. I didn't go back far enough. Now, Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he, my master, has given him all that he has. So yes, Isaac is now the master.
Okay.
That would explain it, but I didn't even pick up on that as I was reading that. But so she took the veil and covered herself, because that was the custom. That's what they did. And then, like I said, he told him everything. So imagine him relating that whole story all over again. And then in verse 67, this is the first mention of marriage in the Bible.
They didn't get married. They just went and...
Maybe not.
Not according to this. They just jumped in the tent.
No.
And he took Rebekah.
That's what it says. But it says she became his wife. So that's the marriage right there. So then Isaac came and brought her, and this is the succinct way it's put. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And it reads like it all happened in that one evening. But you got to remember there are two other times that a great many things happened in the middle of a verse. But some commentaries said that it would have been some time between each of these things. They arrived, he took her to his mother's tent, then they had the wedding, and then they became man and wife. But we don't know.
It's not how you read it back here.
X version back there.
And then the very next verse, it says Abraham got married.
Yeah, and Abraham got married. Well, he doesn't have to see that boy anymore. Somebody else can take care of him. Now I can go get married. But either way that it happened, it seems backward to us.
Yeah.
We think you fall in love, and then you get married, and then you become husband and wife. One commentary said, I live happily ever after. One commentary said this. I thought this was really good. He said, Isaac didn't marry Rebekah because he loved her. He loved her because he married her. Talk about commitment. It's the commitment that he made to her. He loved her because he married her. And so we began this Torah portion in chapter 23 with the death of Sarah, and her tent, her place in the family, had been empty for 3 years. But now Rebekah is the wife of Isaac and is taking on this role of matriarch of the family. As we go into chapter 25, we see the ending of Abraham's history and the beginning of the next generation. But now, I think about this. This is kind of a takeaway for this. Think about what has happened to Rebekah. Think about that morning when she got up and she just went along about her day like any other day, and it comes time to go and draw the water, and she does that. Little did she know that just this humble task of offering a stranger a drink of water would make her the wife of a wealthy man who was in a covenant relationship with God. I mean, just think about that. I mean, just how powerful is that? I mean, we may all have similar stories of divine providence. Of, you got up one day and you did this or you did that and you got this job because of it, or you met this person. But a seemingly innocuous action changes everything. I went to that church Halloween party. And who knew that with less than a year later I'd be married? That was the first thing for me. I never went to those things. I hated them. I never went to youth gatherings. I hated them. But I went to that one, and look where we are. Bunch of years later. But God. That's why that's my favorite phrase in the Bible. But God. We think of Romans 8:28. But here's the thing about that verse. We have this tendency to only quote it when things are going bad. But God, and we know God causes all things work together for good, and we only say that about bad things. That works for the good things too. And for me, my opinion on that verse is the most important part of that verse is that first phrase that's often left out by a lot of people. And that phrase is, and we know. And we know. You can count on it. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. But God. And you can see God's fingerprints and handiwork all over this. So, any other thoughts or questions?
Happily ever after.
We would like to think so, but then they come into the next few chapters. So, yeah, exactly. All right. Well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the details